The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the tall glass windows of Victoria Blake's office. Inside, everything gleamed: polished marble floors, leather furniture, golden light cascading off glass walls. Yet in the heart of it all sat a silence that swallowed everything. Emma, the little girl in the wheelchair, no older than 7, sat still by the window, her small face turned toward the horizon, though her eyes didn't truly see. Her legs didn't move. Her lips hadn't formed a single word in over 6 months, not since the accident. Victoria stood behind her desk, pretending to read over merger reports, contracts, and market forecasts. But her eyes always drifted to her daughter, this once vibrant child, who used to dance in puddles and giggle at cartoons, now quiet as stone. Her suit was flawless, her heels clicked with power, but inside, Victoria was unraveling. Doctors had flooded in from every corner of the country. Therapists, neurologists, alternative healers. Victoria had written check after check, each one heavier than the last with desperate hope. Nothing changed. Emma remained silent, still, a ghost of the child she had been. At night, when the building emptied and the boardroom went dark, Victoria would crouch next to her daughter and whisper apologies for not being in the car with her, for trusting the driver. For every second she prioritized the company over time with her child. Emma never blinked, never flinched, just stared. Victoria had built empires, shattered glass ceilings, and negotiated deals with men twice her age who trembled in her presence. But she couldn't fix this. He couldn't reach her daughter, and that single fact made everything else, her billions, her boardrooms, her power, feel hollow. There was a weight in the air that day, thicker than usual. Maybe it was the storm clouds gathering above the skyline, or maybe it was the realization that yet another therapist had quit, sending a final report that used words like non-responsive, irreversible, and permanent damage. The words clanged in her ears like funeral bells. Victoria's assistant entered, breaking the heavy silence. "Ma'am," she said softly, "the janitor you asked for is here. He brought his son." "I asked for a janitor, not a daycare visit," Victoria replied, her voice tight with exhaustion, but she waved her hand dismissively, too drained to argue. "Fine, send him in." The office doors opened, and in walked a man with flannel shirt, worn boots, and kind eyes. He held the hand of a little boy, maybe 5 or 6, who looked up at Emma with wide eyes. The man didn't introduce himself. He just froze when he saw the girl in the wheelchair. His son tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," the boy whispered, "she looks like me, before you fixed me." Victoria's spine stiffened. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice sharp. The man gently crouched beside his son and looked up at Victoria. "My name's Daniel. This is Micah. I'm not a therapist or a doctor. I'm just a dad. My boy here couldn't walk for almost 2 years. After a spinal infection, we couldn't afford hospitals, so I learned everything I could. Played, talked, listened. I believed he wasn't broken, just scared." Victoria's eyes narrowed, skeptical, exhausted, but curious. Daniel glanced at Emma again. "May I talk to her?" "She won't respond," Victoria warned. "She hasn't moved in half a year." "Maybe she doesn't need someone to fix her," Daniel said quietly. "Maybe she just needs someone to sit beside her without expecting anything back." Victoria hesitated. She had nothing left to lose. Daniel walked slowly to the window. He didn't kneel, didn't speak immediately. He sat on the floor next to Emma and looked out the same window she did. He didn't ask her to move. He didn't touch her. Instead, he told a story about a little boy who used to scream in pain, who once gave up, who believed his legs had betrayed him. A boy who learned to walk again, not with machines or medicine, but with patience, play, and love. Victoria stood frozen behind her desk, not daring to interrupt, and for the first time in 189 days, Emma moved, just her lips. Barely a twitch. But it was a smile, a small, trembling smile. Victoria clutched the edge of her desk, as if the world had shifted beneath her feet. Her throat tightened. Her knees almost gave way. She had seen miracles in business, but none like this. The sun was barely up, casting a pale orange glow through the skyscraper windows. When Victoria Blake arrived at the office, her assistant had stacked the morning with interviews, corporate matters, mostly but tucked between them was an odd request she'd approved absent-mindedly, an opening for a janitor. The position had been vacant for weeks, and she'd finally given in to HR's constant reminders. Asterisk Victoria wasn't expecting anything remarkable from it. Her mind was elsewhere. Emma, always Emma, since Daniel's quiet visit days earlier. The smallest shift in her daughter had taken root in her heart like fragile hope. Emma hadn't spoken, but that almost might have haunted Victoria in the best possible way. Asterisk still, this was business. She composed herself, straightened her blazer, and called for the next candidate. Asterisk the door opened, and in walked the man again, Daniel, only this time, he wasn't alone. His young son Micah clung gently to his hand. The boy looked around the sleek office, blinking up at the tall glass walls and gold fixtures as if he'd stepped into another world. Victoria was about to speak when Micah stopped. Staring at the far end of the room, Emma was there. She had insisted on coming to work. With her mother again, something about Daniel's presence had made her restless at home, and Victoria couldn't deny the request. So she'd wheeled her in and let her sit by the window, as usual. But now, something shifted. Micah let go of Daniel's hand and whispered, almost in awe, "Daddy, she looks like me, before you helped me walk again." Victoria's breath caught. What did he say? She asked, her voice firmer than she intended. Daniel gave her a sheepish, almost apologetic smile. "Sorry, I know this isn't part of the interview. We can talk about the job if you'd like, but he's right. When I saw your daughter last time, I saw my boy. I saw that same faraway look, the fear, the silence." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "And what exactly are you saying, Mr. Daniel?" He said simply, "I'm not a therapist, not a doctor. I fix pipes, mop floors. I'm nobody special." He looked down at his son, who now stood gazing at Emma with quiet empathy. "But I couldn't afford hospitals. I didn't have any degrees, so I read. I tried. I stayed, every day. And somehow Micah started walking again." You want me to believe that you cured your son?" "No," he said. "I didn't cure him. I didn't have the power to do that. But I was the only one who didn't give up on him. I believed he wasn't broken, just ... lost, and maybe scared. I don't want a job, Ms. Blake." Victoria's eyebrows raised. "You don't, I came because I thought I did. But the moment we walked in here, I realized this was something else." He motioned gently toward Emma. "Maybe it sounds crazy, but I think I'm supposed to help her. Not as a janitor, not for pay, just ... as someone who's been there." Victoria looked at him, really looked. Not as a job applicant, not as a man from a different world, but as a father who had known despair and had chosen to fight it not with money or machines, but with love, patience, and presence. Her instinct told her to dismiss him. Her logic screamed caution. But then, for just a second, she looked at Emma. Her eyes were on Micah, still and quiet, but focused, present. Victoria hadn't seen that in months. She exhaled slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want to do?" Daniel stepped forward, keeping his voice calm and kind. "Just talk. Sit with her like before. No expectations, no pressure, no promises." Victoria hesitated, then nodded, and just like that, the interview ended before it ever began. The soft hum of the fireplace filled the therapy room, its warmth dancing gently against the elegant walls of Victoria's private estate. The room was designed for healing colors, natural light, hand-picked therapy tools from the world's top specialists, but none of those things had touched Emma until now. She sat in the corner of the room, her wheelchair angled slightly toward the windows, just like in her mother's office. Her dark hair framed her pale face, her eyes still distant but no longer completely empty. Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, not close enough to startle her, but near enough that she could hear his voice if she chose to listen. Victoria stood in the doorway, silent, watching, hoping. Daniel didn't begin with instructions. He didn't ask her to move, didn't tell her to try. He just began speaking. He said softly, looking not at her, but out the window, as if recalling something far away. Micah once thought he'd never walk again. He used to scream every time he tried to move his legs. I would sit on the floor beside his bed and tell him the same thing every night. That he didn't have to try today. That it was okay to be afraid. Emma didn't blink, but her eyes, once unfocused, now seemed to trace the lines of his face. I remember one day, Daniel continued, a smile tugging at the edge of his voice. He fell hard. He cried so much I thought he'd never forgive me for encouraging him. I wanted to pick him up. I wanted to carry him, but instead, I just held his hand. And you know what he did? He paused, as if waiting for a reply, though he didn't expect one. He stood back up. Shaky, stubborn, crying, but he stood up. I didn't cheer. I didn't even speak. I just cried with him. The room was still. A moment passed, then another, and then, something shifted. Emma's lower lip trembled barely. Victoria leaned forward, barely breathing. She thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow, but then came the tear, a single one, slow and certain, sliding down Emma's cheek. Her tiny shoulders tensed. Her chest rose like a sigh caught in her throat, and then it happened. Her lips curved. It wasn't big, it wasn't clear, but it was a smile. The first in 6 long, aching months. Daniel didn't move. He didn't gasp or call attention to it. He just gave her the softest nod, his voice breaking slightly as he whispered, "There you are." From the doorway, Victoria gripped the wall. Her heart pounded, and the tears she'd buried for half a year flooded to the surface. She had signed countless checks, flown in the best minds in the world, begged for answers, but here, in her own home, it wasn't a specialist who reached her daughter. It was a father, not trying to fix her, just choosing to sit with her pain. And that had made all the difference. The afternoon sun bathed the garden in a soft golden hue, casting long shadows across the stone path winding between hedges and blooming roses. Birds chirped overhead, and a breeze rustled the leaves, gentle, soothing, like the kind of day that seemed to carry healing in its air. Victoria stood at her bedroom window, high above the garden, her eyes fixed on the scene below. She watched as Daniel sat cross-legged on the grass beside Emma's wheelchair, his guitar resting on his lap. Micah played with a ball nearby, occasionally tossing it toward Emma, who would catch it with slow but steady hands, her laughter like a melody Victoria hadn't heard in nearly a year. It had become a ritual now. Every afternoon, Daniel would come, not as a therapist, not as an employee, but as someone who had quietly become part of their world. He never pushed Emma. He brought music, stories, silly jokes. Sometimes they just sat in silence, staring at the clouds. There were no charts, no progress reports, no medical jargon, just presence, patience, and play. Victoria had tried to stay out of the way. At first, she observed with a heart guarded by years of disappointment, but day by day, that wall began to crack. Emma had changed, slowly but undeniably. Her eyes lit up when Daniel arrived. Her smile became easier, freer. Her hands moved more. Her voice hadn't returned, but her spirit had. And now, something was happening. Victoria's eyes widened as she saw Emma shift in her chair. Daniel didn't react. He kept strumming a gentle tune, humming softly, letting her move at her own rhythm. Emma looked at him, focused, calm. Then, with a deep breath, she placed both hands firmly on the arms of the wheelchair. Her fingers gripped tightly, and then, she began to rise. Victoria gasped. At first, it was just a tremble in her arms. Then her knees wobbled, unsure, uncertain, but determined. Daniel stopped strumming. He didn't rush to help. He didn't call out. He simply looked at her, a quiet, proud encouragement in his eyes. Emma stood, unsteady, fragile, but standing. For a long second, she wavered, and Victoria's breath caught in her throat. But then, Emma took a small, awkward step forward. Her legs shook. Her arms fluttered like bird wings, trying to remember flight, and she took another step. Toward Daniel. His arms opened slowly, still not touching her, as if reminding her that she had the strength. And in those few impossible moments, Victoria wasn't the CEO of a billion-dollar company. She wasn't a woman of power or strategy or control. She was just a mother. A mother whose heart had been shattered and now, unbelievably, was being made whole. She pressed her hands to her mouth as tears poured down her cheeks, her body shaking with sobs. She had imagined this moment in dreams, in prayers, in quiet hours when the world slept and grief was loudest. But nothing could prepare her for the real thing. Her daughter was walking. Emma fell into Daniel's arms, laughing, breathless, alive. He caught her gently, lifting her for just a second before setting her back on her feet. From the window above, Victoria whispered to herself through tears, "Thank you, thank you." She didn't know if she meant Daniel, fate, or something greater. But deep in her soul, she knew this was the beginning of something new. Not just for Emma, but for all of them. The ribbon fluttered in the wind as children ran, Across the courtyard, their laughter echoing through the open space of the new center, painted in bright colors with murals of soaring birds and smiling faces. The building stood as a symbol of hope, a beacon for families that had felt lost in silence, in struggle, in pain. Victoria stood by the entrance, her expression soft and glowing, nothing like the sharp, guarded woman who once ruled boardrooms from the top floor of a glass tower. She wore a simple dress today, her heels replaced by flats, her phone tucked away. Beside her stood Daniel, adjusting the microphone at the small stage. They had set up beneath a canopy of balloons and paper butterflies. Months had passed since that moment in the garden. Emma had not only learned to walk, again she had come back to life in every way. Her voice returned in whispers, then sentences, then full-bellied laughter. And with every step, every word, Victoria had discovered her own healing too. What began as a single act of compassion had grown into something bigger than any of them. They had poured their resources and their time into building the children's center, a place where kids recovering from trauma, injury, or loss could come for care, play, and love, regardless of what their parents could afford. There were no fees, no requirements, just open doors and open hearts. Emma now skipped through the garden with Micah, the two of them practically inseparable. They held hands as they explored the playground, their bond stronger than many adults could ever understand. They had been through the dark and found the light together. Daniel stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the crowd of families, donors, and friends who had gathered to witness this dream come true. He cleared his throat, then smiled with a quiet humility that instantly drew people in. I'm not a doctor, he began. I'm not trained in therapy. I used to mop floors and fix sinks, and when my son got sick, I thought the world had ended. But I learned something no textbook could teach me. He glanced at Micah and Emma playing in the distance, then looked toward Victoria, who nodded gently, her eyes already shining with emotion. Sometimes healing doesn't come from experts, he said, his voice steady. Sometimes it comes from someone who's just been there and chooses to care. The crowd was still. For a moment, even the children seemed to pause, as if the words hung in the air like a blessing. Victoria walked toward him slowly, and in front of everyone, she took his hand. No titles, no boundaries. Just to people who had once been strangers, now joined by something far deeper: compassion, shared pain, and the decision to rise from it. Their families, once broken, now stood whole. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, lighting the center in gold, it became clear to everyone present. This was not just a grand opening. This was a beginning of healing, of hope, of a new kind of family.